Alrighty, so today I will be talking about the western gray squirrel, scientific name Sciurus Griseus. My name's Noah Wall, and without further ado, let's begin. So an introduction to our siamorphic friend. Obviously the common name, as I just said, is the western gray squirrel, scientific name, again, Sciurus Griseus. And then kind of breaking down the classification, we have order Rodentia, suborder Sciuromorpha, which is based off the infraorbital form and shape and orientation. Um, Going down farther, we have family Sciuridae, genus Sciurus, and then species being Griseus. And obviously here's an image of him there. He should look a bit familiar to you. Continuing on, getting into the distinct traits of this organism, adults tend to be up to about 24 inches in length and can be as small as about 18 inches or so at maturity. And that is including the length of their tail as well. Their coloration is frosted grizzled, so they have that frosted grizzled pelage. So each strand of hair actually has that white tip to it. They have that white ring around their eye, however, that is not diagnostic of the species. And they're also strongly countershaded. So we see they have this black, grayish pelage on their backs with this really strong contrasting white belly there. So they got that strong countershading. And then just a comment on tree squirrels in general. Of course, this isn't specific to the species, but it has a really large tail in comparison to its body, and that serves as a form of balance. It also, when looking at its skulls, the tree squirrels tend to have eyes much farther to the side. So you'll see a big difference in the width between orbits of a tree squirrel when compared to that of a ground squirrel. Squirrels in general, these sciurids just tend to have the really large orbits, rounded egg-shaped skull, and prominent post-orbital processes. So that's just something to keep in mind when diagnosing Sciuridae in general. Continuing on to distribution, habitats, and diet, I kind of consolidated these into one slide here. So as the name implies, western gray squirrel lives in the western United States, as well as a very small part of northern Mexico, but mostly just western US. And they'll be found in Washington, Oregon, California, and a small part of Nevada. Their preferred habitats tend to be conifer, hardwood, as well as hardwood conifer habitats, so mostly areas that are densely treed, as the organisms are scansorial, so they rely on an abundance of trees. And their long claws allow them to scan trees, climb trees really quickly, and also the way that they can rotate their palms allows them to scale or descend trees very rapidly as well. Their diet is mainly herbivorous, although they will occasionally eat insects, but for the most part, their diet consists of shoots, leaves, fruits, berries, nuts, seeds, and fungi. Nuts and fungi in particular tend to be found underground. So what these organisms will do is they'll actually distribute and bury their nuts, and then they will actually find them later on. And to do that, they rely on their keen sense of smell, which they use to find distributed fungi as well that normally probably they wouldn't be able to find if they didn't have this distinct sense of smell. Finally, their diet largely overall depends on the environment that they're in. A lot of the sources I came across describe these organisms as incredibly opportunistic when it comes to their diet. Continuing on, when looking at reproduction, especially reproduction frequency, we see that they have about a litter per year on average, which I thought was surprisingly low for litter yields annually. Their average litter size tends to be about 3 to 4, but can reach 5 and can be as low as 1. So there's some variance there. Gestation period is usually about 44 days for these guys. Sexual maturity reached at 10 to 11 months. And lifespan in the wild is about 7 to 8 years, which again kind of surprised me, especially for a rodent. That seems like quite a long time. Just throwing a lot of numbers at you there. Dealing with extreme temps, specifically the cold for the most part. So they're non-migratory. So these guys don't do an annual displacement where they move around to tolerate the environment or extreme temperatures. Instead, they tend to stay rather stationary, and their strategies for coping with the cold include their diurnal activity. Obviously, it's warmer during the daytime. They will retire to their abodes made out of trees, as I'll get to in a second, during the nighttime. And what they'll do is they'll make cavity, as I just said, they'll make cavities in these trees, or sometimes what you call snags, which are just trees that are really dried out, dead trees. And they'll use these to house their broods during the winter, especially. Oftentimes they'll make homes in woodpecker cavities that have already been pioneered, and they'll just enlarge these abodes. And what happens is the tree acts as a buffer against the cold, obviously separates these organisms from the harshness of the environment when it is extremely cold out during these winter months. And the young will reside in these abodes and congregate to stay warm. So not only just going into that spherical shape to preserve warmth, but also exchanging their body surfaces with each other to better transmit and efficiently produce and conserve this heat. So that's a really important tactic there. Also, another thing that will occur is that these organisms are reported to have a year-long diurnal activity, despite the fact that seasonal dormancy is still arguably displayed. So even though they are continuously diurnal and they are active throughout the year, their activity levels significantly diminish during winter months, is what scientists found. So you could argue that this is still seasonal dormancy, a lot of which relies around the young. The young absolutely require a buffer from the environment, such as these cavities in trees. Also, they will make something that are called drays. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, where they make on the ground, they make an outer shell, almost like a semi-sphere-esque home, where the outer shell is made out of sticks, just stronger, more rigid material, and the inside is insulated with spongier material like mosses. So they kind of have this whole insulation system going and this buffer from the environment that they will use to deal with varying temperatures as well. Also, when it's warm, they will make homes on tree branches. Finally, just to wrap this presentation up, getting into some of the human interactions with these guys, as well as a fun fact. So the U.S. Endangered Species Act does not recognize this species, Sciurus Griseus, as threatened or endangered. However, at a state level, the state of Washington does recognize this species as threatened. Oregon also states that they are a state-sensitive species. In terms of pests, these guys are quite abundant in the United States. So you see them a lot in the Western U.S. So it's almost inevitable that they will occasionally run into humans and cause some problems. They're known to invade attics, gnaw their way into houses. They do a lot of chewing, so that's usually where the problem stems from. And again, this is something to be aware of. They can act as pests. Considering their impact, or at least their potential for a positive impact on the environment, I suppose, or humans as a species, what they do, again, is they're really important for dispersing seeds. They have these seed caches. A lot of them remain in the environment. And again, there's a lot of animal species that are essential for dispersing seeds. Squirrels are just one of the many, I suppose. They're also hunted or trapped occasionally. Their furs are sometimes harvested and used for insulation, as well as their meat. But nowadays, it's really rare that that occurs. But they definitely were an important aspect of the hunter and trapping industry, or at least donated to that industry a little while back. A quick fun fact on the species is that when they feel threatened, these squirrels will release a really high-pitched barking, almost, a barking sound, I feel like, is a good way to describe it. Kind of like that of marmots, another type of ground squirrel, but it's a really interesting behavior, and they'll flick their tails back and forth really rapidly and do some foot pounding. And they're really cute little guys. It's really funny to see them do it. But that's a conclusion there. I'll end it at that. So I hope you learned something about our friendly furry friend, Sciurus Griseus, and have a good day. Bibliography here.